All right, welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into the foundational and, let's be honest, often wildly misunderstood ideas of Jean-Jacques Rousseau's 1762 masterpiece. Writing in an era totally dominated by absolute monarchs, Rousseau literally flipped the script on where political power actually comes from.
Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. Man, what a legendary hook, right? It's easily one of the most famous opening lines in history. But here's the thing, and this is absolutely crucial. Rousseau isn't arguing we should just tear down society and run back into the woods. Not at all. He's simply acknowledging the stark, everyday reality of our societal chains. Think about it. We're born with natural liberty, yet we live our entire lives bound by laws, property, and civil institutions. So how can these chains actually be made legitimate? This right here brings us to the ultimate problem of the Enlightenment. How can we establish a stable, functioning political authority without completely sacrificing our innate freedom? Or to put it another way, how does a society transform mere physical coercion into a true moral duty? Well, that's exactly the giant puzzle Rousseau sets out to solve. Section 1, the paradox of freedom from nature to civil society. Let's take a look at how humanity's transition out of the state of nature actually builds an entirely new kind of freedom. This comparison brilliantly illustrates the ultimate trade-off. Looking at the state of nature, it's chaotic. Sure, you have natural liberty, which basically means you can take whatever you're physically strong enough to grab, but you're essentially just a slave to your own brute appetites. But then, look over at the civil state. By entering society, we lose that unlimited right to tempt fate and grab everything in sight, but look at what we gain in return. We get justice, we get legally protected property rights, and most importantly, we get moral freedom. We're suddenly guided by duty and reason instead of just random physical impulses. We actually become masters of ourselves. And this massive transition, it's all achieved through what Rousseau calls the social compact. It's this foundational agreement where every single person surrenders their independent, natural rights to merge together and form one singular, indivisible collective body. So you're not submitting to a king or a tyrant, you're submitting to the whole community. And the kicker? You are an absolutely equal part of that community. Moving on to Section 2, the general will, or the math of philosophy. Now, what's super fascinating about this next concept is how Rousseau basically attempts to mathematically define the will of this brand new collective body we just created. So, by definition, the general will, la volonté générale, is like a unified arrow aiming straight at the common good. It operates completely independently of whatever any specific individual might desire for their own selfish gain. Think of it like this. If society is a single giant body, the general will is the brain making the decisions that keep the entire body healthy and prosperous. Now, the really crucial point here is that the general will is absolutely not just majority rule. If you look at the will of all, it's basically just a math equation that adds up everyone's private, selfish interests. But the general will, that's what's left over when you cancel out all those competing private desires. Actually, fun fact, Rousseau completely despised political factions. He hated them because they just group together selfish interests and end up corrupting this pure, distilled, overarching objective of the state. So what happens if your personal desire totally clashes with the general will? Well, Rousseau says if you disobey it, the collective will actually compel you to follow it. And this leads to his most controversial, eye-catching phrase, you will be forced to be free. Sounds like an oxymoron, right? But his logic is that because the laws are made by the collective, which, remember, includes you, obeying the law is technically just obeying yourself. So by forcing you to follow the rules you helped create, the state is actually forcing you to stay free from being arbitrarily dependent on anyone else. Section 3. Sovereign versus government, the balancing act. Let's quickly untangle a massive mix-up that literally destroys many states. The vital distinction between who makes the rules and who enforces them. Rousseau strictly splits the state into two distinct parts. First, you have the sovereign. This is the entire body of citizens. Its role is purely legislative. It wills the laws into existence, and its authority is absolute and inalienable. Then you have the government. This is just the executive arm. It's made up of magistrates or administrators whose only job is to actually act out those laws. Essentially, the government is just a subordinate, delegated middleman, and Rousseau warns that if the government ever tries to make the laws, or if the sovereign tries to execute them, the whole system instantly collapses into despotism. This hard distinction actually leads to Rousseau's surprisingly pessimistic view of pure democracy, Because a true democracy merges the sovereign and the government together, meaning the whole population both makes and executes the laws, Rousseau argued it's a system better suited for gods. For everyday humans to actually pull it off, it requires impossibly strict conditions. We're talking a tiny, tiny state, immense equality in status and fortune, and practically zero luxury to corrupt people's manners. Instead, he took this highly materialist, almost sociological approach. He argued that the perfect form of government actually depends heavily on a country's natural surplus. For instance, harsh lands with really low surplus can only afford a cheap democratic government. Moderate lands, they suit an aristocracy. But highly fertile lands that generate massive surplus, they actually require the heavy, expensive hand of a monarchy to consume all that excess. So for Rousseau, a one-size-fits-all government? No way, it just doesn't exist. Section 4. The threat of decay, the inevitable death of the state. Because despite all this perfect planning, we have to face the reality that, just like a human body, the body politic carries the seeds of its own destruction right from birth. Rousseau warns us that the government has this natural, completely inevitable tendency to exert itself against the sovereign. Over time, power just concentrates. It contracts, moving from many administrators down to a powerful few. And eventually, those few will usurp the sovereign power entirely. They'll start ignoring the laws, rule by force, and boom. The social contract is broken, and the state completely dissolves into tyranny and anarchy. It's a pretty bleak cycle. So how on earth do we slow down this inevitable death? Well, to prolong the life of the state, Rousseau heavily championed regular, unavoidable citizen assemblies. And here's the absolute genius part of his plan. The very moment the people assemble, the government's power is temporarily turned completely off. Executive authority is completely suspended. During these assemblies, the people have to vote on two massive things. Do we want to preserve our current form of government, and do we want to keep the current administrators? It's basically the ultimate system reset button. Finally, Section 5, Rousseau's revolutionary legacy, direct versus representative democracy. Let's wrap things up by exploring the radical ideas that eventually fueled major revolutions. Honestly, if you take just one thing away from Rousseau, it has to be his fierce, uncompromising defense of direct citizen participation. He absolutely despised representative systems, like the British Parliament, for example. He insisted over and over that sovereignty simply cannot be delegated. If you elect someone else to make your laws for you, you've essentially just voted yourself into slavery. For Rousseau, if the people haven't ratified a law in person, it's totally void, it's not even a law. He even went so far as to controversially propose a mandatory civil religion just to hold this fragile state together. Now, to be clear, he wasn't trying to dictate private theology. Internally, people could believe whatever they wanted, but publicly, citizens had to profess a simple faith, basically a belief in a higher power, the absolute sanctity of the social contract, and a strict forbidding of intolerance. It was purely a political tool, a way to ensure ultimate loyalty and social unity above everything else. Which brings us right back to today. Just look at the political systems around us right now, built heavily on representatives, intense factions, and competing private interests. So we'll leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought to measure our modern democratic systems against Rousseau's incredibly high whiteboard perfect standards. Are we actually exercising our general will and living as free citizens, or are we simply choosing our masters every few years? Something to think about.
Please like and subscribe.